Now, bigger picture to this. Do we ever want things to be out of phase? Rarely. But music is art, not science. There are some times where things actually do sound better out of phase. Sometimes when we're layering our kick drums, we don't necessarily want the low end to be as prominent. This is a very rare instance. Actually, let me backtrack.
Wait, what did he just say?
Sometimes when we're layering our kick drums, we don't necessarily want the low end to be as prominent.
Alright, there's no way I'm not trying that. I'm Josh, I'm from the channel Josh Richards Producer, but today I'm here on WeissAdvice on YouTube, and that's WeissAdvice.com. And speaking of WeissAdvice, I was rewatching this video that Matt did a while ago on phase, and he said this little gem, and I thought to myself, I've got to give this a go. I also thought to myself, I feel like I've done this before, but I never really knew that that's what I was doing. That might not seem like much, but I do think there is some wisdom in that, and so I'm going to touch on it again at the end of the video. If you haven't already guessed, this video is going to be on a relatively advanced technique to keep our low end in check by using an out of phase kick drum sample. So it is worth going back and watching Matt's video on phase if you haven't already seen it. But don't worry, if you're new to music, I'm going to start from a pretty basic description of what phase cancellation is, and I'm going to work my way up to this technique. And if you've been making music for a while, make sure you stick around, because these rudimentary examples are going to serve as a baseline for understanding the technique as we move forward. Now, I want to be quick with this because Matt does go over it in his video, but if we imagine sound vibrating like this, we've got moments of high pressure where it compresses and moments of low pressure where it refracts. That propagates through the air, and it's going to hit our microphone capsule, and it's either going to push on our microphone capsule or pull on our microphone capsule, and that's going to show up in our signal as either a positive or a negative signal. Over in Cubase, I have a sine wave, and we can see this sine wave is evenly oscillating backwards and forwards between positive and negative. Now, the easiest way for me to explain phase cancellation is like this. I've duplicated this sine wave so we can see that the positive peaks line up and the negative dips also line up. So what's going to happen when I add these two sine waves together? They're going to double in amplitude. I'll show you. Right? But what if I select this bottom one? Move back over here. What if I select this bottom one, and in audio, I'm just going to go process, phase reverse. Well, now the positive parts of this signal line up with the negative parts of this signal. I'm going to hit play, but watch my sound meters over here, and we'll see what happens. So no sound comes out, but the meters are obviously going. That's because these two waves are perfectly cancelling each other out. So a sine wave is a really basic wave, and we can take this a step further with a square wave. I've got a square wave just here. And on this channel, I have a square wave that's an octave up. If I start off with my lower octave and I add in my upper octave, we're going to hear them just get added together. But what happens if I flip the phase of this upper octave? Well, that's really interesting. We lost a lot of the sound, but not all of it. Now, I'm a visual learner, and so I want to move over to a different editing software to demonstrate a bit of what's going on here. Now we're in GIMP, which is a free photo editing software, and I've taken some screenshots of a frequency analyzer that I've run these square waves through. This one just here is our upper octave, and if I click this little eye, we're going to see the layer beneath it, which is our lower octave. Having a look at these square waves, we can tell that they're not a smooth line on our frequency analyzer, and what they're actually made up of is a series of resonant peaks going up the audio spectrum. If I grab the opacity on this top layer and I start to drag it back, we can see that some of the peaks of our upper octave line up with some of the peaks of our lower octave. So to make this a little bit more clear, I colored the peaks of our upper octave teal and our lower octave red. So if we have a look at this here, we can see these red peaks on their own, and we can see these teal and orange stripy ones where both the lower octave and the upper octave are being represented. But there is some funny stuff going on, like this point just here. So the way a square wave works is the series of resonant peaks slowly drop off as you go up the frequency spectrum, and that's why our fundamental tone sounds like our fundamental tone and not a subharmonic tone. And that drop off means that we're not getting an even cancellation in the top end here. We can see that we are still going to cancel every second resonant peak, but it's not going to do it evenly, so we're going to be left over with a fair amount of this top end. I can demonstrate this pretty easily one other way. If I bring these two layers back and I set this top one to color arrays, it's going to get rid of anything that's the same color, much like if we were to flip our audio out of phase, just with pictures. This isn't a one-for-one analogy. It's not exactly the same, but I do like having a visual reference for the kind of thing that's going on in the audio domain. Everything I just said is true if our waves are time aligned, but what happens if I grab this upper octave and I shift it along in the timeline so it's no longer lining up with our lower octave? I'll play this back and I'm going to flip the phase and we'll see what happens. So that time, we didn't lose most of our audio like the first scenario. What happened was we started in one place tonally and ended up in another place. Now, when we're dealing with multi-microphone setups, much like recording drums, generally what we're looking for as far as the relationship between our microphones goes is something that's much more analogous to that first example, where when we flipped the phase of our upper octave, we lost a lot of the sound. That's traditionally considered as your phase being out, and when we flipped the sound back the other way, all of the low end came back, and that's traditionally considered as good phase, or your phase being in. But what we're looking for with this technique is actually much closer to that second scenario where we had a textural difference. So here I have a snippet of me playing drums, and I've got some samples down below it. Let's start off by just having a listen to what's going on with these drums without any of the samples in. So it's kind of a hip-hop inspired arrangement played on acoustic drums, and it's super duper crunchy. There's lots of distortion going on. Let me show you the sample that I'm going to mix in. I'll turn it up a bit so we can hear. Now let me drop it in to our drums. So I'll start off without the sample, and then I'm going to hit play and I'll unmute it while we're listening. So it's kind of lengthening our low end. It's adding a bit to that sub content as well. But I wanted to be able to tell a little bit better what was going on between our sample kick drum and our live kick drum. And to do that, I've pulled up In Phase. There's another great plugin that Matt's done videos on that you should definitely go and check out. What we have here is on channel 1, 2, our sample kick drum is coming in. And on our side chain, we have our live kick drum. If I zoom out, we can see there's a couple of them. They all line up. And if I come back in here and we have a look at the waveform of these two kick drums, we can see there's kind of some funny stuff going on at the start. These two peaks kind of line up, and as we go on, the peaks get a little bit closer. But then our kick drum kind of does this funny hump, and as we move towards the end, we actually start going out of phase. So it's not entirely, everything isn't one-to-one like the sine wave that is just doubling itself. And it shouldn't be. They're not the same kick drum. Let's have a look at what happens if we flip the phase on our sample kick drum. It's a little bit tricky to hear, but I think when you listen to these three notes that are kind of bunched together, it's a little bit easier. What I'm hearing is that when my phase button is pressed in, we're kind of shortening the low end, and we're subduing that sub content a little bit and bringing out more of that mid-range content. When the phase button is out though, what we tend to get is a lot more low end and a bit more length to the kick drum. Both of these sounds to me are super usable, and so we can be kind of creative with how we implement these sounds. I'm going to unflip my phase button so that we've got the more low end in our kick drum with the longer sustain. And I'm going to add in this 808, which is just playing whenever the kick drum plays. Everything's sounding pretty good to me. There's a lot of sub-content. Stylistically, that does work. But I want to come back over to in phase, and why don't we just have a listen to what happens when we flip our phase while the 808 is playing. Let me come back to this little group of 3 and play it one more time. It is a little harder to hear when the 808's in there. I really like the sound of the phase button being pushed in when the 808 is playing. I feel like it shortens that kick drum up, like I said before, which creates more space for the 808, and it also kind of reinforces that mid-range content, which is going to give us more character overall as well. Why don't we take this idea one step further? You can see that I've got my 808 over here, but this section beforehand and this section afterwards don't have any 808. So maybe for these sections, I want my phase button out, and maybe for this section when the 808 comes in, I want my phase button pushed. So let's do something a little bit crazy and automate our phase button. So I'm going to come over here, turn on right automation. We'll play it through. Turn that back off. Let's have a look at how close I was. It's pretty good. And over here, we can turn it back off, like I was saying. And let's have a listen to that. So, when the 808 isn't playing, our phase button is out, and our kick sample is giving us a bit of extra low end and a bit of extra length. When the 808 is playing, our phase button is in, and our kick is going to shorten up and create a bit of space for that 808. Now, I do think we're talking about relatively small differences here, but phase is something that we're going to have to consider anyway, and so why not be doing the best job that we can with our phase? It's not like a whole other process that's going to take more effort, for example. We're already dealing with it. So what an absolute little gem hidden away in this old WeissAdvice video. I'm going to be doing this a lot more consciously from now on, I can say that much. And I think you'll remember that at the start of the video, I mentioned the fact that I felt like I had been doing this, but I didn't realize that I was doing it. And I actually think there's some wisdom in that, because whether you're getting into music or you've been doing it for a while, it can be really hard to take on all of the awesome information that's out there in a way that's useful and a way that's tangible. But I think part of the key to that is to be hard-headed with how we make our music and to just go for the best results we can and learn in the background. I don't think I realized that I was doing this technique because I was focused on the work that I was doing at the time and not the techniques that I was using to get them done. And I'm a huge advocate for learning these techniques, but I'm a much bigger advocate for getting our hands dirty and making music, because that's the best way to learn. And if we do that stuff beforehand, then when we go and find this information afterwards and we can go, wait a second, I think I've done that before, it clicks so much harder and you're going to get a lot more from educational content out online. That's all for this one. If you like the drums in this video, check out my channel, Josh Richens Producer, and make sure you also head over to WeissAdvice. Matt's got tons of awesome courses there. They might teach you about a technique that you didn't even know you were doing in the first place. So head over there, get yourself informed, and remember, we are musicians. Sound is our instrument. I'll catch you next time.